Yes, hello, folks. Welcome to the weekly Manchester United podcast. I'm your host, as always, Phil Bryant, joined with my regular co-host, the excellent James Rhodes. Jamesy, how you doing, man?
Doing pretty well today, and you?
Well, not too bad. It's a Monday, but and it's the day after a disappointing United result, but also, of course, what was a pretty excellent result and performance against Bilbao. Almost being completely forgotten about now, James, after what happened yesterday, man.
It's kind of funny, isn't it? Because I think each week we'll kind of sit there and go, right or wrong, right? We've had this debate, and I think it was something worth discussing. Right or wrong, each week we'll kind of sit there and go, it's all about this Europa run. Premier League, it doesn't matter. It's dead. There's a couple games left. It's May. You know, we're going to have this big debate over whether we finish in 13th or 17th is not exactly up to, not exactly that meaningful. And then we have a result on Sunday that ends up drowning out the performance on Thursday, and understandably so too. But it is kind of funny that, I mean, let it not be forgotten, United just finished 7-1 in aggregate over a Champions League team. Fourth place in La Liga, is Bilbao right now. They're going to the Champions League. They're one of the best defenses in Europe. 7-1, pretty good. But understandably as well, you can only you still got to watch these other games and see how they go, and
Well,
plenty to worry about.
undoubtedly, the Bilbao game over two legs, exceptional result, exceptional home and away. Lots of positives. Mason Mount scored again, couple of goals, and everything looked positive. And then we get the Premier League dose of reality again.
hmm
And ultimately, the Premier League is what United, aim for. This is the biggest barometer of success. This
Yeah.
is what they build their squad based on. And the reality is, James, United are 1 point away from being the worst team in the Premier League of all the teams except the three that came up.
Yeah.
Now, this, I don't care what anyone says, this was not planned. I
For
did not.
sure. For
I
sure.
did not. I
Yeah.
didn't. I'll be honest, James. I like Amorim. When he came in November, I didn't expect this.
No, it's definitely worse. I mean, it is worse. There's no doubt about it, it's worse. But it is kind of crazy. And I was looking at the numbers as well, and it's wild how it happens here, right? But I looked at the numbers since the March international break. 7 games for United. They have the least points in the Premier League. They have two. Um, it
Won
doesn't.
two games
At the
in
same time,
January.
yeah. And at the same time,
Ipswich and Leicester. That's it.
I
That's
know,
not
I
good.
know, and
Sorry,
and
go ahead,
and, and
mate.
the thing that's crazy about it at the same time is that, like, it's not making excuses for it, because at the end of the day, results will always be, you have to end up getting results. But I think, of course, you want to look at why are you not getting results, because
Mm.
it's not like they just appear out of the blue. They don't that happen by magic. The results are the result of performance generally, and you can get things that adjust that on a game to game basis. But over that period of time, to have 2 points. But if you would look at the games for the most part, we'd sit and say United probably were performing better in a lot of those games. I mean, they
Mm.
played Arsenal, they played City, they played some very good matches in that time, bar Newcastle and maybe this West Ham game at the end. And then in there, based on some like numbers, like expected points, they're at the same number in those 7 games, performance-wise, as Chelsea. Chelsea have 14 points over those 7 games, and United have 2 and have won 0 games and lost 5. It's kind of crazy how it plays out, and but I don't think that makes it not reflective of a reality, which is United won't win games because they can't score goals in the Premier League. They just can't. They cannot score in the Premier League. They've had 13 games, I think, um, with scoring 0 goals in the Premier League. And if you go through the last weeks of there's a lot of games like that. They cannot score goals in the Premier League, and no matter what you do, if you can't score goals, you can't get points. I mean, it's football. At the end of the day, you put it in the net or you don't, to win or lose games.
Yeah, look, to me, when you look at United, it's not a mystery why they're in
Yeah,
this position, right?
yeah,
I mean, they have a serious problem up front. And we're still talking about a 72 million pound striker. To me, James, there's always a threshold, and I don't know how where it is or how it happens,
Mm,
but there's always a point for me where I get to a point where I feel like I've given up on this
mhm,
individual ever reaching the levels required to be a Manchester United striker, and the consequences of not having even an average goal scorer in this team is
mm.
so obvious. Even that game yesterday against West Ham, the chances United missed in that game that you would when Holland missed
It's
one.
point blank, man. I mean, it's like
Yeah, I'm sorry that you're a striker. It doesn't. It's not an awkward position. You know, it's you've just scored a couple of goals. Um, I expect my striker to be taking that. You know, when I was watching the Arsenal PSG game, I remember the first game at the Emirates where Martinelli missed a chance that
mm,
he should have taken.
yep,
And when you want to and that to me was pivotal in the whole tie.
yeah,
He
yeah,
Dembele scores a chance, and the goal scorers, the people that can put the ball in the net, are the ones that made the difference. You see the consequences of not. I mean, this is where it's obvious for Amorim that this is a big problem. I would accept also, James, that he's had horrendous, freakish, almost like voodoo bad luck. I mean, I think about this.
yeah.
Like I was saying about yesterday, I'm like, Aiden Haven comes in, plays well. Well, we're going to injure you. Lenny
One
Euro
game.
comes in,
Mhm.
we're going to injure you. Johnny
Yeah.
Evans, we're going to injure you. You know, Mazzaruri, yo, you're doing well. Well, we're going to injure you. Dallo, you're having playing well. Well, we're going to injure you. Oh, you know what? Mainoo playing well. Well, we're going to injure you. Oh, Joshua Zirkzee gets to return back to form. Well, we're going to injure you. Ahmad starts to play exceptionally football. Well, we're going to injure you. And it's like, and then watching Euro game, I'm like, what the fuck is going on here? Like, this is, I'm sure all football clubs have, football fans have this in their head, but I'm going, I swear to God, right? United, it doesn't matter who they sign, they're going to be injured out for weeks. And
Mm,
they're pivotal. Lissandro Martinez, you're playing well. You know, like that quarterback
I
will
know.
do here. We're going to injure you too.
Yep.
I'm like, this is ridiculous. This is
Yeah.
completely ridiculous. And to me, it's like there's something weird at United where that, you know, I look at Liverpool, basically the same team every week. Their key players almost never injured. And I'm looking at Newcastle's team now, consistency, consistency, consistency. And I'm like, before that game yesterday, I'm like, Matesta, like, we're going to injure you. And then we'll get to Lana Euro. You like playing finals. You had an unbelievable game on Thursday. We're going to injure. It's like, what's
Mm,
going on here?
yeah.
No, and
It's
honestly,
wild.
I
It
feel for
is.
him in that
Yeah.
instance, no doubt about it. But James, you can't, you, you know, United are now approaching the summer in identical situation to the approach last summer in that a final might be enough to save a manager's skin. Regardless, they have to commit to him this summer. But you know, to me, like this is a big test, not just of Amorim, but of Wilcox, Barada, and all the people that picked Amorim, because we're
Mhm.
still trusting their story about expertise, and I haven't seen it yet.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about it is they is from an outside perspective, right? To a degree, it can feel like a similar situation. From the inside of it, it can't be. You know, they went into last summer being in doubt whether they needed to keep Ten Hag or not, right? Well before the final. You know, I think it was in May 13th, actually. Tomorrow, a year, they had a meeting in Monaco and said, um, hey, we've decided to change managers. They had an executive meeting in Monaco at that time and made the decision to change managers. So, at least they made a decision. Now then they completely screwed it all up. And my point being, regardless of whether they got it wrong or right, and they definitely got it wrong in the end,
Mm.
they were on the right track to saying we have to settle and have a decision made. I still think May 13th is way too late to decide to sack your manager for what it's worth going into summer, because you have to commit in, you starting the transfer work in February. You're starting not starting, but actually doing the concrete things, talking to agents, talking to players, talking to deals, things like that. You're starting that January, February into March. By April and May, you're not just having conversations, you're laying down deals, you're putting them in place. That's what good teams are doing, right? That's what well-run teams are doing. That's where, I think Liverpool had McAllister wrapped up in April a couple years ago, ended up, obviously being one of their best players, things like that. That's what the good teams are doing. They're getting them done at that point in time. You can't have instability while that's occurring. You can't have an unknown while that's occurring. You
Mm.
can't have, especially when you're talking about managers who have their systems, who have their profiles, who have their formations, and who have all this. You have to have it nailed down. So I think last year it was already too late by May when they made that decision. And I think it had a big knock-on effect on all of the business of the summer as well. But of course, then they went back on it. They cannot be in the same boat now. Now, I personally don't think they are from the conversations that I've had in the last day or two. I think it's settled. Amorim will be here. They're going to give him the window
Yeah.
because they're not just backing themselves. They're not just backing him. They have to. Because the other factor in is you look at it and say, they change Hubert Amorim now. Who are they going to get? What's going to make a difference here? Who's this magical, I'm not saying you're suggesting it. I'm saying
Yeah, no, yeah, it would
it's like
reflect terribly on INEOS if they did that,
it
James.
would be horrendous, but it's also like who's going to fix it? Like where's the guy? You
Yeah.
liked Thomas Tuchel, fine. Well, he's with England. That was the guy you really liked last time, Thomas Tuchel. Well, he's with England. You're gonna go get Graham Potter. I mean, he beat us yesterday, but he's had an awful time at West Ham and looks like an awful decision. So you're not gonna get anybody. Kieran McKenna's just been relegated.
Wait, why does
Ipswich.
Graham Potter look like an awful decision, but Amorim doesn't?
Well, yeah, it's a good question, isn't it? Right? No, I'll tell you why though. Because we've seen a lot of Graham Potter in the Premier League now. We've seen a lot of him,
Well,
like at multiple clubs, and he's never really shown anything
I think
at
he did all
all.
right at Brighton. I thought, but James, hold on, right?
Yeah.
Because do you remember we were arguing this podcast a couple of weeks ago
Yeah.
about Amorim saying these last few league games, we just have to play the kids and the focus is on Europa. And I said to you back then, that's a mistake.
Yeah. No, you did, and you're, and I think you're even more correct in the aggregate
Because if you
on
give players an excuse to lose, they'll take it, and
that.
that's what he did. He
Yeah.
said our
Well,
focus is on Europa, and now he's saying,
yeah.
forget about Europa. These are the little things
Yeah.
that concern me. Then something that he said about Cheeto Obi that I didn't understand either about his movement being naive. You can say he's a young player, he's got a lot to learn, but when you say something specific like that, you put that in the heads of people, and you put it in the heads of critics, and they're going to look for that now.
Yeah.
These movers, naive, and a 17-year-old, you tell a 25-year-old that they burst out. 17-year-old, that hits hard. And movement is something that comes with sometimes experience, but a little bit of coaching, but a lot of it's instinctive. And what's more, when we looked at Rasmus Højlund's movement, I never heard naive about Rasmus Højlund, so I didn't understand why he wanted to go after Tito Obi and say something like that. And say, I understand that 17, we all know he has to improve, but I didn't understand that specific criticism. He also said, I don't care what people do at other clubs. It's what they do here. Well, the same is true for him. Doesn't matter what you did at sport, no matter what you do here. And I can tell, obviously, it's driven him insane, right? Obviously, he's embarrassed by it. Obviously, he's not happy about it. And I 100% agree that he should be given a summer and supported. But I'll be totally honest, James. I've never become so quickly indifferent to a manager than I have with Amorim, where I'm like, okay, Solskjaer came mid-season. This didn't happen. I'm looking at Amorim going, you were 4 points off top 4 when you took this job. You're now basically 1 point above the bottom 4. That's unacceptable, James. I'm sorry. That is unacceptable. And he has to take some responsibility for that. Now, I believe that there's a lot of things that aren't his fault. But what I'm concerned about, and I said this with Ten Hag, is what United team are we going to have in August? And that United team cannot start slow. They have to. He's now under pressure where needs all these players, and they have to start immediate, and they have to start fast.
Yeah. The one thing I do want to just contest on that, because I've seen that one thrown around a little bit on the points thing, and I think it can obviously be a bit misleading. When Ten Hag was sacked, United were in 14th.
Yeah,
They
but
were
you know,
7 points off of top four, and in 14th
but then
when
Van
Ten Hag was
Nistelrooy
sacked.
was after Van
Correct,
Nistelrooy.
correct. But he did play Leicester
So
twice
yeah,
in
no,
the
no, but
span of a week.
forget about Ten Hag. Doesn't matter, James.
No,
Right?
no,
They're
no.
the only
But my,
teams
my,
he's
my
managed to
point
beat.
is, no, no, no. I understand. But my point is,
No,
when he was sacked, we were in 14th. When the first manager was sacked, we were in 14th. And
doesn't
when
matter when he took over from Van Nistelrooy. They were
I
4 points
hear
off
that,
top four.
I hear that too. But I do
That's a
think it's a
fact,
little
mate.
bit misleading.
No,
No,
no, but
I
it's
think
not because
we were
the
in
clock starts
13th
when
place
Amorim.
though, Phil.
Yeah,
But
but
we were in
mate,
13th.
yeah, but the clock starts when Amorim takes the job. 13th just doesn't matter. You're 4 points off top four.
I get
Right?
that, but you're also saying like Van Nistelrooy's been it was there for 5 months by then.
No,
It
no, no.
wasn't
That's
like
not
he
what I
was
meant.
new
I
on the
just meant that
job. You know what I mean?
when he took that job, United were 4 points off top four. It doesn't matter if they're bottom of the table. That's still a factual statement. And
Correct.
they are miles off.
But
I
Phil,
think they had a really poor January.
yeah,
I don't even think it
yep.
made sense to get rid of all these players and not bring anyone in. But I'm still willing, like I haven't given up on him, but I'm looking at things and going, you're asking a lot for United fans to. I mean, if this happened somewhere else, he would have get sacked. If he'd
Yeah.
have went to Real Madrid or he'd have been sacked over this.
Yeah, but they also would have sacked a manager after
Well,
last
they have
season,
better
you
players.
know.
I understand
You
that,
know.
but
Look, the only thing,
yes,
the only reason I slightly again, and I think it can be slightly misleading. This point is that look, after
that
two game weeks, if you're 4 points off top four, that doesn't you could be the worst team in the league is 4 points off top four after 2 game weeks. Like the fewer number of games there are, of course, the smaller the gaps are between teams. That's just normal.
imagine a horse race, right? There's like
No, but
all
look at
these
the gap.
horses
No,
in the
no.
back, right? And you're like number four, right? But we're all still
Yeah,
in the pack. And
yeah.
maybe you're,
Yeah, but if
you're
it's in the first 2 seconds of the race, then it's
yeah,
like
but
we're
it's
out of
not
the blocks and it's like
exactly.
everybody's together.
It
By
was
the end of the race,
November.
that guy might have a broken leg and
It
be,
was November.
Yeah, but it was only 11 games. It was only
Doesn't
11
matter.
games. It was
4 points.
only No, no, no. I know. But
How
look,
many
but
games did
4 points.
Win in the league?
What's that?
How many games did Van
Two.
Nistelrooy
He
win?
only played 2 games, didn't he?
And he still has the same number of wins as Amorim has had since January.
Yeah, that is true. That is true. Well, we have 0 in the last 7 games. I mean, 0 wins in 7 games,
James,
which is
just
pretty
take the
bad.
L, man.
What's that?
Just take the L.
No. We actually hold on a second. Yeah, we won 1 game. So look, he won 1 game. Like here's all I'm saying. He won 1 game. All right, and against Leicester. All right, that's the same as we've always been able to beat relegation teams. We can beat relegation teams. We've been
Didn't
doing it
even
all
make
season.
Didn't even know
Against Leicester, yeah. Against Leicester as well, right? No, but then Ruud van Nistelrooy went to Leicester and got relegated. So clearly, it's
I'm not,
like,
not
he's
comparing the
not the
root
savior. No,
and
I know. I'm just teasing you. But no, but look, I wanted to comment on your point on the point of the players being complacent and things, because it obviously started to really kind of get to Amorim on that. And then one of the things I think is correct, that's worth noting, and I think it's one of the things the owners have to take massive responsibility for. And I'm talking about INEOS, not the Glazers, because they were in charge at this point in time when they did this last season. Is that in this talk of like whether a cup changes anything, whether a cup means anything, whether a cup changes the direction of things. Like obviously it makes sense. Winning a Europa, it's winning something. It's a good campaign. It makes it a good thing. It gives you money. It gives you all of this. Whether United win or lose the Europa League does not change how bad they are. It changes none of that. It changes absolutely nothing. But it is the same thing as when United won the FA Cup year last year. It changed nothing about how bad the league campaign was. It changed nothing about how bad they were, which is why we started the next season and we were back in 13th again right off the bat, because it changed nothing, right? And I think that it is something. It's really quite dangerous, because I think what the owners did at that time, because I'm not going to blame on Ten Hag or something like that in there. He was the manager. Now, he very much made a lot of statements about how it was successful because we won a trophy, regardless of being so bad in the league, which I think is a poor mentality that is reflected through the rest of the team now. But what the owners did by keeping him was essentially agreed to that. No, they said, look, You won a cup that earns you a chance, despite the fact that we were the worst United team in the league ever at that point in time. And I think that that is a really, really dangerous thing to have accepted. And I do think it's a big reason
Worst
why a
United
lot
team
of the
ever at that
players
time?
in the Premier League last season, yeah, they were the worst
Oh,
Premier
well,
League
Premier
United.
League.
Yeah, yeah,
Well,
yeah, yeah. In the
yeah,
Premier
now they've
League,
got
yes.
their worst points total since 1930-31, since
Yeah, no, now it gets worse for sure, for sure.
yeah.
Yeah. But no, but at that point, no, but that's what I'm saying, right? Is last season we had the worst Premier League team ever for United, and it was okay because we won a cup. That was the decision that came down from ownership, that it was okay.
Well,
Then we did it. So then the next season we have an even worse season, you know? And I think that those things cannot be separated. It is a knock-on effect of the acceptance of that as like it was okay. They should have they really, really should have just, I mean, they should have sold more players, changed everything at last summer. They should have, and they didn't.
yeah.
And I think it is a knock-on effect of
Well,
that as well, really.
I think in INEOS's defense, even though unquestionably they got that decision wrong, I
Yeah.
can understand why Ratcliffe said, "Look, we just didn't have our feet on the table long enough to
And I
really,
get that too. Yeah.
properly educated assess to say you might get them wrong, but trying to get a decision right and getting it wrong is forgivable. Getting it wrong and you've never actually tried to get it right is not. So
Mm,
people make mistakes. So I suppose in that sense, I can understand. Plus, the season that Ten Hag had was during a time of you know great turmoil because the club's
mhm,
being put up for sale and nothing is wasn't given any money in January. And so if I'm any else, I could look at that and go, okay, so I can sort of attribute. It's hard to know what he's entirely responsible for and what he isn't,
yeah.
but he has to start fast, which he didn't, and
Yeah.
I think United made the right decision. Um, but for Amorim, James, if he loses his final, uh, I speak to people that are very measured. Take long time to make decisions on people and are not reactive and hysterical over one or two results. And this is the first time I've spoken to those types of people where they've been this apathetic this quickly, where they're like, you know, this guy might be an exceptional manager, and I understand. Like, I agree with him when he talks about culture, everything else that needs to change, no sense of urgency. There's nothing he can do about that. That's down to players, and he has to have the alternatives to drop players for that, but he doesn't.
Mm, yeah.
But to me, it's like if he loses that final, it, he's really in a negative equity situation with United fans.
For sure. I think that's true. I don't think it matters because I think fans are in general stupid, but I'm
Mhm.
sorry to say that. I do. I'm just saying, I look, after last summer, I lost, not respect is not the right word, but it became very, very clear to me that fan opinion is not on football matters. I want to be very clear on football matters is not something that I'm going to follow too closely, because I thought it was like I look at it in reverse and I say, because I don't want to make it a big Ten Hag bashing session, right? But you look at a manager that assembled and was overseeing the worst squad we've ever built by far, which is true. It is the worst team we've built. The
Which
money that
one?
was spent under Ten Hag in his tenure,
Oh,
the
I think the
money
one he
spent is
inherited. I
absolutely
think the one he
criminal.
inherited was pretty bad.
It was correct. Look, this is an ongoing problem, right? But the money we spent, I think, was worse. Like when you look at the transfers we made under Solskjaer, we got players who are still contributing, Bruno Fernandez and Maguire, and some key players in there, and people that have done pretty well for us. The money spent is crazy. The money that we spent on, and that's not all on Ten Hag in the slightest, right? But we had this period, we spent 700 million and had our worst Premier League season, and you had the majority of fans that wanted to
We spent
stay.
what?
700 million over the 3 years. Um,
Three. Okay, but he. So the thing is that the first season you'd have to say that was money well spent because United finished in the
I
Champions
can't,
League and they
but
won a trophy.
they bought Anthony for 82
No,
million
no,
during
no.
that
Well,
year.
of course, but um, Anthony. But I will give you 100%. There's
Yeah.
absolutely no doubt about that. But Ten Hag, if you looked at the United that he inherited from the Ranić era, they were terrible.
Mm.
All of a sudden, he gets him in the Champions League. There was a period where they were playing a really good football. He won the League Cup. People off
But
towards the end, and I would have to say that first season, I don't think Martinez was a bad signing. I think if
no, no.
Casemiro left the
I think
summer,
it
you
was
have
still
to.
too expensive, though. But that's not on him in that
Yeah, I
essence.
mean, I
They
don't
were
know.
too
To me,
expensive.
like, yeah, I mean, but
Yeah,
if you judge it today, maybe you get a lot for less. But back then, you were still paying those types of fees. And
yeah.
Casemiro was a really good signing. Even if he left today, I would say I would give him a 7 out of 10. I know he had that dip last season,
Yeah.
but he's been a very. I think he's played quite well over the last couple of months.
Yep.
I think if you look at a number of those signings that he made in those first season, the second season is where shit started to go wrong.
Mm.
In the second season, if you remember, I remember United going for Mason Mount having no cash in the bank, right? That they could pay, and then so it was essentially building a squad at that point, not to win the league, but to maintain.
Mhm.
And to me, like there's issues that Amorim was talking about that have nothing to do with the manager that
Mhm.
everyone's talked about
Yeah.
culture, all this, and these are issues. I'm not to exculpate Ten Hag. You have to do the same
Yeah.
for Amorim. I think these are harder issues for United to fix because you can't
Yeah.
fix that in the transfer market.
I agree, and I think my point on the matter was this: like, it's very difficult for me to sit here when we as United fans will sit there and go, we've had these owners that have ripped the squad to pieces, ripped the club to pieces, I should say, not the squad, but the squad as a consequence of that, ripped the club to pieces, poor investment, lack of investment, never put in, transfer people, never put in proper recruitment people, never took responsibility of duty of care of the club, never helped to set anything but a culture of self-greed and importance and all of that. Done all of these things, and then take a manager 6 months in and say, "Oh, I've lost confidence in him." I can't. I can't
No,
I can't even think that way. You know what I mean? In general, right? I can't even think that way. It makes no sense to me. You know what I mean? Because it's like, how is it you can't tie those two things together because all the other things are true. It's it's there's a point you can judge that is worth judging, and there's obviously criticisms and things like that, but all those other things I think are true. And the only thing I wanted to say about the prior period is I don't think we gave enough credit necessarily to Marcus Rashford, because if you look at the period under Eric Ten Hag, we didn't actually play well for more than the 6 months that Rashford was scoring goals in the first season. We were really poor to start the season. He was fantastic, carried the team up to that League Cup final, scoring goals. And the minute he actually picked up an injury, I think it was right after that, right? A shoulder, something like that. Missed a couple of games, was working his way back into fitness. We
did his
stopped
hamstring against
scoring.
Leicester?
Yes, something like that. And we stopped scoring goals the minute he stopped scoring goals. And outside of that 6 month run, literally 6 months, I think it was, and that 6 month even included, I think, the midseason World Cup that actually was very odd and in there. United were poor. They won the League Cup, then they lost 7-0 to Liverpool, the next week. They won the League Cup, then they beat Barcelona, then they got knocked out by Sevilla after a 2-goal lead. They conceded 5 straight to Sevilla, in a Europa League.
Once
And that
Martinez.
was yeah, and that was that same first season. And the second season went the same way. And so I think that, to me, what's really odd is I think we were bad most of the whole time. So I'm like, it was like we were literally just carried by Marcus Rashford for a 6 month period, which to me is like, well, why
Nah,
are we
mate,
making
come on.
excuses for this?
Casemiro
For
was
a
very good in
year.
that first
No,
season.
no, no. I didn't
Cassandra
say every
Martinez
player.
was
I didn't say every player.
yeah, yeah,
I
no,
didn't say every.
it was
But my
more
point
than
was,
Marcus.
but yeah, you're correct. You're correct. But what I'm saying is this: it's a goal scorer. We had a goal
Dude,
scorer,
you see
and we
that first
haven't had one
January?
since then
Okay,
at all.
we haven't had, but well, see that first January, Ten Hag was the only manager in Europe to qualify for the Champions League and not being given any money to spend. Remember, he had to bring in
Yes, it's
Sabitzer and
correct as well.
Veghorst,
I
right?
100%. Yep.
Sabitzer and Veghorst. He
Yep.
needed a striker, and he didn't get one.
Yep.
And it was a free transfer. Anyway, and then
No,
of
no,
course
no, for sure, for sure. And then they
they went and
compounded it
spent.
by not getting Kane or Osimhen and getting,
Yeah,
Rasmus Højlund for 72 million
and
as well.
remember, Hoyland was very much John Murray.
Yeah.
So, uh,
Yep.
so he didn't get what he should have got that January. So inevitably, United had a drop off, which
Mhm.
which the score was already thin on the
Mhm.
ground. But anyway, we can go do
Yeah,
that
yeah,
for
yeah, yeah. No, it's just to me like you got like there's a lot of explanation that can give in there where I look at it and I say until the managers had time to shape a team, what's the point? Confidence or not, you know what I mean? But I know that for the most part, people are probably in agreement. They can have the concerns and things, but you give them the summer, you give them the time. One thing I personally do want to say is a positive for me. When we ended last season, I had no idea who we should keep or sell in the squad. I had none. I had literally no idea because you could say all of them, and you might feel that way. But I quite literally had no idea who was actually like good or not at all. I think it's pretty clear at this point in time, the players that should be kept and the players that should be moved on. I think we've been able to see it better than we have in years past. What is needed, and the job is huge in that respect. It does need quite a significant turnover, um, to fix
what is
things
your
up.
copy
And
menu, James? What do you
yeah,
because this is a young man that looks very, very lost in
yeah,
unknown. And if I'm him, I'm having discussions over the summer about this because bringing on 10 minutes there, doing this. I mean, this is not for a kid that went to the Euros a year ago, and Amorim doesn't seem to know how and where to play him in the system,
hmm
and he looks like a young man that has to make some big decisions, and these are the gambles you need to take in because if with Amorim, I mean, whatever you say, whatever people say, DeMarcus Rashford and Anthony loans haven't maybe not reflected terribly on United, but it doesn't help the narrative that you're the problem, not them.
yeah,
And
yeah.
so if you need to get rid of someone like a Kobe Mainoo and a Garnacho for Amorim, and in October, November, he's in the same position as Ten Hag, that's a big risk.
Yeah. Well, look, I'm in agreement in certain respects. I don't think that you should get rid of players necessarily for a manager, and I don't think I think Kobe Mainoo for me falls in the area of a player that I really don't want to see United move in any respect because he's a talented player, a very very talented young player who's come through the ranks at United for a long long time, and I think that from my perspective, it's been a little bit of a hard one to figure out because I do feel like there's an effort on both sides to figure out how to make him work with Amorim and his system. I think when he came in, he was starting pretty regularly in the two alongside Ugarte. One of the things that I personally believe is just that from a fitness standpoint, I think Kobe's really struggled. And I'm not blaming on this. I'm talking about his injuries in particular because he picked up two kind of major muscular injuries during the season, and they can have a tough, you can have, and after that big injury obviously last year, but he was looking really ragged at the start of the season, playing in the pivot with Christian Eriksen, things like that, having a rough go of it. He's looked slower, and again, I'm not picking on him in the slightest on this because I know what he can do, but when I watch like him against Wolves that game, that 4-3 comeback last season. He scores against Wolves and the movements and the way that he plays. And you watch some of those when he kind of first got into the team, much quicker, more agile, faster, evades the pressure better, rides the contact better, lots of things. He looks very, very leggy, even when he's just coming on right now. And I have a strong feeling it comes down to the muscular injuries that he's had and working back from them. That's my feeling anyway, and my hope is that it's one you give him the summer of, like, getting fully fit, figure it out. That would be my thing, is just figure it out because I think that you've got to. I don't think you wanna move players like that on in that situation just because it's like a tricky fit into a system. I think you can make it work because you have a talented player who can still develop a lot and add a lot to his skill set and find a way to make an impact when you have that kind of talent. So yeah, I mean, I'm in agreement though there. Like, it's the thing I wouldn't do. It would be very worrisome to me if we were to see him depart in that respect.
Well, the thing is that he's in the process of trying to negotiate a new contract, so he
Yep.
himself might want to go. And it looks like he's been told to get physically bigger. Let me ask you about Manuel Ugarte because he made
Hmm.
the mistake for the second
Yep.
goal. What's your take on him?
I tend to over defend mostly on him when I talk about him, and in large part because it's the first season in the Premier League. It's the first season for him. It's the first season in the Premier League. I kind of feel that way about a lot of players. I tend to go pretty easy on them in the first seasons when they join. Especially, I think people underrate the age factor in here and the experience factor. I mean, he turned 24 during the season. It's not exactly old for a player, but the first season, at United, the first season in the Premier League, I think you go a little bit of easy. I mean, we've seen players like, of course, Patrice Evra being a good example of a player who really struggled when he first joined. Ugarte came in. Ten Hag didn't want him. We kind of know this factor, right? Ten Hag didn't want him. Fine, fair enough. Whether he was right or wrong remains to be seen. But he didn't want him at the time. He came in late, didn't have a preseason with the team, didn't have a
Mm.
preseason with the club, didn't play for 2 months when he came in. He's in his first 6 months of playing for this club. And so I look at him in a similar way to I look at Patrick Dorgu, where I look at Dorgu and I think he makes a lot of mistakes. There's a rawness there. There's a sloppiness there, but I still think there's an improvement to be had. I think Manuel Ugarte is extremely similar to Matthias de Ligt, by the way, and I think it's kind of surprising the way that he's viewed different to fans. Both are players that have really strong physical traits. They win the ball back a lot. Both have made, I mean, their fair share of mistakes. De Ligt's given away like 5 penalties this season, by the way. But and they both fight hard. They work hard. They seem to have a good mentality. Um, they can be loose on the ball. They're not as good as potentially some of the other older players, like you compared to Ligt and Maguire on the ball and things like that. You compare Ugarte to Casemiro on the ball. But I think both are good players that deserve to see a bit more time in the team. And if they end up being in the long term bench players, that's okay for me because I think they vastly improved the level of quality that we've had coming off of the bench and in starting games. And I will also say that on that aspect for Ugarte in particular, I think he is a big part of helping with seeing the best out of Casemiro in recent times, playing them together, giving Casemiro somebody next to him as well with some physicality, some legs that assist him in
Mm.
things like the press, the things that he does struggle with a little bit with the age factor, and allow him to do what he does really well. But it's not an insult, I think, to for Casemiro to be better at certain things than you, given that he's one of the best midfielders of the last 20 years. It's like,
Yeah, whose legs apparently didn't go after all.
yeah.
I'm thinking about when Ten Hag said it could take months for Agarte to work out how we plan to get in the team. Maybe I'm starting to wonder why he said that. I think that in my head, Ten Hag was trying to buy himself a couple of months before he had to, you know, he clearly didn't rate Manuel Agarte,
No, he did not.
right? And I think when he said something like could take him months was in a way saying, I don't want to pick you for the next few months.
Pretty much, yeah. That's what I
And
figured.
after the Spurs game, when to me, that goal that Spurs scored after like a minute
Yeah,
when
yeah,
the
right in the
Random
beginning,
run
yeah.
through the blue, and they just conceded a goal like that against 20 and Skada a few days before that. And when Agarte, to me, was the most culpable in all of that. Like there was many, but he was definitely the most culpable. And I'm looking at him yesterday, and he gets the ball in acres of space, James. I mean, there's no one near him.
Yeah.
And then he waits for the contact in the back to try to get a foul. I'm like, why aren't you attacking? Like, why
It
isn't you
was it
pump
was
up
a
the
weird
field?
one.
Why are
Yeah.
you slowing?
Yeah.
Like, why are you waiting to get a free kick that they're going? Like, that's an opportunity to break, move. It's like, why did you stop and then
Mhm.
lose the ball and stand there?
Yep.
And Lindelof doesn't cover himself in glory either. Bowen's at the back post. You know, the two players at the back post who are ball watching.
Yeah.
You know, and I'm like, this is the same goal I saw against Newcastle away.
Yeah,
You
yeah.
know, ball back across. Also with young Amos, every time I see that kid, I'm even more convinced that young man needs a loan.
Yeah, me too as well. I mean, I remember prior to United conceding the goals, right? And obviously the second one was a big mistake from Ugarte on that. I was sitting there. I was watching. I was on a plane actually, and I was watching on the Wi-Fi and on my phone, which was just okay.
Single engine Cessna coming back from
Yeah,
Portugal. Where you manage
right.
that?
Yeah, it was. I was
Mediterranean of
able
the
to
race.
catch
Sorry.
most of it, right? But the first 20 minutes, I was sitting there over and over saying, "Put the ball in the box," because he kept getting it up the left side and just would not put the ball in the box. He just would not cross it. He'd get there and then he would just turn around and go backwards, and then United would inevitably lose the ball. And I was just like, ah. Anyway, he's a young kid. I think he needs a loan. I think it would be good for him. I think it would help a lot, and I think
Yeah,
it would make a big difference. That's all. And I think he's talented, and I think he's a good kid and has room to grow. But he needs the experience of playing to sort those kind of moments out. Um, but no, I mean, like I said with Ugarte, to me, I tend to actually be really soft on players in their first season, no matter what my prior thoughts on them were. I have major doubts on Delict, and I think he's been about the same as Ugarte for me. And I like both of them, and I think that we'll see how they go in another season with a preseason, with a coach, because both of them, they all joined late as well as the other factor that I do think does matter in this. I think Delict joined after the US tour as well, right? From if I'm not mistaken, him and Mazraoui joined in the same week, like right at the end of the preseason, from what I recall. And it is what it is. I think a lot of them. That's one of the things that he cannot do. We've said this before, unfortunately, haven't we? I think we say this leading into every summer. You and I, we talk about this. We say one of the things they cannot do is sign players in late August again, because
yeah. I
it
don't.
like
I
the
mean,
effect that has on the season and how you start, it is huge. It takes time for these guys to adjust to a team and to adjust to a club and everything. They cannot keep doing this like end of summer, suddenly you're getting in 3 or 4 of your key players thing.
by the way, if anyone's listening to this, feel free to contact us because I'm sure there's players James hasn't been kind to in the first season,
No,
and
no, I'm serious. I'm serious. I'm quite
just
serious
went
on this.
after Ten Hag on some trumped up charges. So let's just let's
I only went after him in his second season, by the way, even Ten Hag. I have my doubts, but I actually was pretty positive on him towards the end of the first
yeah.
season.
Let me check your notes
You
on
can
your
check
iPhone
check
on that.
check
I
the
guarantee you,
check
you were
check the
taking notes.
VAR here, okay?
They
Check the
were
VAR.
terrible the first part of the season, and then they were terrible the last part of the
Well,
season.
we were. I mean, look, we lost the first 2 games and some of the worst
Yeah, but
performances we've
and
seen.
then they beat Liverpool, and they
Yeah,
significantly
I know.
improved after that.
Yeah,
So I don't
that's true.
know. First two
True.
games,
No, but on players, I do mean it.
Draw away
Uh,
to Ipswich in his first game, didn't they?
yes, it was a
Um,
1-1 draw. Yep.
Nah, listen, I think that if anything happened to Amorim right now, it'd be total madness. And
Yeah,
he's clearly a very, very good coach. I remember when
yeah.
United
It was very
brought him over.
frustrated. Yeah,
Well, like, I remember when they get hired. I remember one of the first things I'd say, because we used to hear this about Ten Hag, and they can't coach and all this. Whatever happens, he
mm,
can coach.
yeah,
Obviously, this is about a lot of issues that are outside of his control. Some are, and not completely sold on the system. I have concerns about it and whether United will ever. I think in teams that you where you're exporting, where you dominate possession a lot, the negatives of that system don't get exposed a lot. But I think in the Premier League, it is different, and it remains to be seen if he can make this successful. This is where the United are making a big gamble
yeah,
because if they move from Amorim, they're not going to another 3-5-2 coach type of, it's going to be completely different, or a 5-3-2 or however they want to do it. It's going
yeah.
to be very, very, so it's a big risk.
And I do think in that respect, it's kind of the point you say, like on Mainoo that was you're bringing up there. But I also think it's important in recruitment. It's why I don't want to see us buying. I'm very supportive of Ruben Amorim. I do think he'll be successful. I don't want to see us buying like wing backs. You know what I mean? I actually quite like buying, guys like wingers and like an Ahmad who you play at wing back, because the manager moves on. Ahmad can be a right winger in any team in the world. If he's playing at right wing back or right winger, it's not much difference. I don't want to see us buying guys like, Frimpong, for example, is one I bring up because he's a very talented player. he'd be a disaster as a back four right back. You don't buy him in there. He's kind of an in-betweener. He's been playing in a three at the back system forever. For Alonso over there, you change managers, I think you struggle with guys like that. I don't want to see him do that as well, for sure.
On Lenny Euro's injury, do we have any update as to whether he's? I heard the last I had read on it that it wasn't that serious, and that there's a lot of optimism he'll be ready for the final.
Yeah, they were more optimistic. He obviously didn't have a boot on, was walking on his own, limping a little bit. I think there's two kind of things in this, which is that one, um, he shouldn't still have any remaining issue with his foot from prior surgery, right? Because he had this fracture in his foot at the start of the season that was there, that ended up getting aggravated in that preseason game, and then getting the surgery and fixing. It's been long enough. He shouldn't really have any kind of issue with that. You can see that. I think there's a lot of fear from him when he first felt it because of of having these injuries and knowing what it meant at the time. So, but he seemed to be okay. That it wasn't so bad. We haven't heard anything disastrous as of yet. I think he was due to have some scans and tests today, and then we'll find out. Now, obviously, when you get to the last game of the season, I think that everybody will take a little more risk than you might for another game. If you need an injection, you take it, type of things. Like, these things do happen. Like, and I think Maguire, had some hip things, and he was playing through injections because he was needed at some points and certain times in the last year. I'm just speculating on that, but we haven't heard anything bad as of yet, and so hopefully the no news means it's minor enough that we will see him.
There's part of me would like to hear from Omar Barada, because to me, this is bigger than a manager. This is a club issue. Now, maybe they'll do it at the end of the season. That's fine. But there has to be, to me, an explanation as to how this happens. And I'm not talking about Amorim, because Amorim's part of their decision-making process.
Yep.
How did we get here? Because this was not expected. This was not planned. This was not what INEOS intended. And, how do we make sure something like this never happens again? Because,
Yep.
James, United don't have a lot of room for error to get any worse.
Yep.
And to me, I am not completely certain about my confidence in the expertise of the people that we've been told have it. When we're talking about culture, why are we still talking about culture? Why wasn't that something that any of us have made an enormous effort to change? Why are Man United players going out on the field and feeling that it's okay to lose? That everything's about the Europa League, which to me is a consequence partly of what the manager said, but also, why is this a situation at this football club? Why are players not physically fit enough or have the athleticism to play in the league that they were signed? Like, these are things that INEOS and Barada need the answer, and not Amorim. Like, that's partly where I feel sorry for him. Like, I mean, we're talking about getting rid of Rashford and Antony. United I think they'll sell Garnacho in the summer, and Rasmus Højlund. I mean, it's a terrible time to try to put him on the market.
Yeah, it is. It is for sure, and I agree with you on hearing about it. Because we heard from Omar and Ashworth after.
What have we done?
Yeah, we've heard from Omar and Ashworth before that Liverpool game with the dreaded, vote of confidence for Ten Hag that didn't last very long after that, and then we've not really heard much since then. I mean, maybe maybe they felt it was a bad idea because you go out and do that and then things don't turn around and suddenly you're
okay, but that's your job, James.
No, I know, but then you gotta do it.
Media when it's safe.
I know.
And this is what you're here for. The future depends upon your expertise. So if you come out and say something that doesn't go wrong, doesn't go right,
yep,
I don't need you to say something to know it anyway. You're here because you're to be successful. If you're losing, you're not. It speaks for yourself. But when this is the time when you do it, when you're losing, you need to provide fans with something that they can hold on to that says, okay, I'll give you more time. That's not what I'm seeing. I didn't, you obviously are, in possession of much more information than what I am. Give me a reason to keep believing.
Yeah.
Like,
I completely agree with you. I've been asking
let
for
me ask you this:
years
if Amorim goes, should Wilcox go?
yeah, 100%. Actually 100% because they got it then they got it completely wrong in that respect, you know? Um, then yes, in that respect, because I would consider it a failure, you know what I mean? I would consider it a failure of decision making. Now, I don't think that every failure deserves a sacking, right? But what I would say is this: if you, I think that if you give them recruit good players, you get into next season and it doesn't work out later, but you do still feel you actually have a good squad. You climbed up the table, but you don't reach, the top expectations. At that point, you can say, fine, that it wasn't like this massive mistake or something like that, right? Like Amorim doesn't have to win the league for it to have been, to for like it's win the league or everybody
Of
gets
course
sacked.
not.
You know what I mean? Right. I'm not saying you're saying that, but if you sack him today, then you
Yeah,
guys gotta go. You guys have to go because you've done all of
yeah,
this. You made this whole situation happen. He didn't want to join as well. That's the other caveat on this. He told him he didn't want to join now. He said, look, I'd rather join at the end of the season. I don't think he's stupid. I think he kind of knew what he was getting into, and they told him, "You gotta join now or never," you know? And I think that, it's predictable in that respect, and you're responsible for it when you tell a guy that. When he says, "Look, I have these concerns, I have these problems. I don't I need to be able to reshape the squad." Look, he went through this at Sporting, for what it's worth. In a similar way when he first joined them. He joined Sporting had been kind of shambolic and in a somewhat similar situation to United, 19 years without a title they were at, I think, at that point.
mhm,
They had this issue. I don't know if people know so much about it, but they had this issue like with the ownership. They had fans invade the locker room when Bruno Fernandes was there, a while back, and like literally they were fighting between players and fans and yada yada and all of that. And it was a complete mess of a club, right? And he came into the situation and in his first kind of time when he was there, did a lot of the same thing of culling a lot of things. And he talked a lot about the culture and he talked a lot about changing these things and he talked a lot about getting rid and moving a lot of players. And I think it was recognized by him that it's a similar situation, but that doing it at United under the pressure of a mid-season, under all of that without a window is way worse than doing it at Sporting. Way, way more pressure and all of that. And so, look, I think it's very much on the people above him. And if they were to say, "Good, he's the wrong guy," well, then so are you. So are
yeah,
you.
I
And
agree.
and I think that I would personally like to see, because I've said for a long time, I really do think there should be more from the people above the manager at United. In the modern day, I don't think you can keep deifying managers in the same way that Sir Alex was, where Sir Alex was the club. You got to have more than that. You have to have people above them that are responsible, that are accountable, that are front facing, that are taking responsibility, because it would also help relieve the pressure, on the manager too, and take them out of this firing line so much. I strongly believe that come the end of the season, before the Europa League, after maybe not before the Europa League, because I can see the narrative goes the wrong way there. But afterwards, regardless of what happens, they should do an interview post-season or some piece or something that comes out from
Mhm.
them that affirms their decision to keep the manager. And I'm not talking like a month later in June, but like immediately, that affirms the decision to keep the manager, lays out the plans for what they need to do, and everything that you said there, so that it puts it all firmly on them for what has happened and where they're going, moving forward. And I think that that's the right thing to do as well, in that case.
All right, Chelsea away on Friday.
Would you play anybody? This was the one question I wanted to ask you on your opinion on this. Would you play anybody in that game? Like, can you afford to not? Casemiro won't have played for 2
Mm,
weeks if he doesn't
yeah,
play Friday. You gotta play him, some of
they
these
have
guys
to
a
play.
little, don't
Yeah,
you? You
I
have to.
understand. Yeah, you lose rhythm, you lose sharpness.
Yeah.
I understand there's a risk involved with playing them, but you can't take a player out for a couple of weeks and then just throw him into a game and say, okay,
Yeah,
hit top form again. That's after
it's
that,
tough. Yeah.
yeah. So they're going to have to take some risks, and players will have to
It'll be
play.
a serious game for Chelsea because 'cause they're right in that top 5
Yeah,
thing.
I mean, I'm not looking forward to it, James. I'll be honest,
Yeah.
and
Should
I.
United should United set up into should United we've seen them do it before. Should United approach this game in a similar way to the final, given that it's a serious game for Chelsea? Be okay to hit it into a defensive game, you know?
I don't
defend
think we
deep
should do
and
that in the final, though. I think
um,
Spurs are a team that are just they're like United, but in a sense slightly worse in that they're so there for the taking that if you go at
yeah,
them, they're already going to be nervous. You go at them, you score early,
mm,
they're going to fill their pants, James.
fair, yeah,
And so to me, like sitting back and letting Tottenham get comfortable and letting them adjust to the event, we'll get to that in a minute, is a mistake. But with Chelsea
yeah,
away, in light of, I look at Ruben Amorim on the bench and I feel for him because it's obviously turning apart. Even the
yep,
first half of Bilbao at home, you can see, he had a little bit of a kerfuffle. And,
uh,
the doors in agony.
yeah.
But we've
Oh
all
man,
been there.
oh my god, oh
But
yeah,
and then he's sitting there like rocking little foot, eating his finger and all. Something they get every Monday, don't worry.
yeah,
But he is someone that clearly is very troubled by it. I think United have enough to win the final. Chelsea, look, anything other than a loss is a decent result. And I think United have still Villa to play too, and then the Spurs game in midweek. So it'll be the next time we come on here, we'll be a couple of days out from the final, and the
mm,
Chelsea result will be in. Yeah, I don't know. I don't think we'll see the likes of young Tyler Frederickson or anything. Um, but that back line will be interesting, and yeah, it's not a game I'm particularly looking forward to. But I still think United will win the final.
hmm I do as well. I do as well. I think that in big tournament games, it's big players, right? At the end of the day, it's the best players have to show up and carry you, and I think United have the best players in that respect in comparison to Tottenham. Guys who've been there,
Yeah,
Casemiro, guys who've done it, guys who show up when it matters. I think Bruno, Ahmad, Casemiro, Maguire, these guys they
yeah.
have more of those players who will just show up when it matters and have been in these big games more than the Spurs have at this point. So in that respect, I think so as well.
I agree, my man. All right, mate. Do we have anything else before we go?
Uh that's it, I think. Yeah.
Why did the man fall down the well?
Why?
Because he couldn't see that well.
I'm I'm gonna check the unsubscribes that come around the 58th minute of the podcast.
They say love shit, I guess. All right, we'll be back next week, folks. Take it easy. I hope you're well. Jamesy, all the best, mate.
Yes, you too, buddy.
Bye,
See you later.
folks. See ya. Bye.